I thought I was prepared for a spooky night shift, but nothing could have prepared me for the twisted rules and chilling encounters of this haunted car wash. Get ready for a story that will leave you wondering if the cleaning supplies are really the only thing that's dirty. The first time I saw the Vivacity car wash, I should have turned around and driven straight home. But desperation has a way of making even the most obvious red flags look like welcoming banners. I needed the job, and they needed someone willing to work the graveyard shift from midnight to 8 in the morning. What could go wrong at a simple car wash in the middle of the Arizona desert? The building itself looked like it had been forgotten by time. What once might have been a bright, cheerful blue paint job had faded to the color of old bruises, peeling away in long strips that fluttered in the hot desert wind like dead skin. The neon sign that spelled out Vivacity flickered erratically, with a V and Y completely dead, leaving only ICT glowing weakly against the star-filled sky. It gave the place an almost alien quality, as if those remaining letters were trying to spell something else entirely. 3 wash bays stretched out before me, each one a concrete cavern that seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it. The overhead fluorescent tubes buzzed and flickered like dying insects, casting dancing shadows that made the empty bays look like gaping mouths. High-pressure hoses hung from their reels like sleeping snakes, and the smell of industrial soap mixed with something else, something organic and unpleasant that I couldn't quite identify. My supervisor, Jim, was a weathered man in his 60s who looked like he'd spent most of those years squinting into the desert sun. His handshake felt like gripping sandpaper, and his eyes held the tired weight of someone who'd seen things he wished he could forget. When I asked him about the previous night shift worker, his expression darkened. Let's just say he found other opportunities, Jim said, avoiding my gaze. Look, kid, this isn't like other jobs. There are rules here, specific rules that need to be followed exactly. No exceptions, no shortcuts, no thinking you know better. You follow the rules, you'll be fine. You don't. He trailed off, shaking his head. The employee break room was a small, windowless space with concrete walls painted an institutional green that had probably been cheerful decades ago, but now looked sickly under the harsh lighting. A metal folding table served as a desk, and taped to the wall above it was a typewritten list on yellowed paper. The heading read, Night Shift Protocols, in bold, capital letters. Memorize these, Jim said, tapping the paper with a nicotine-stained finger. Every single one. Your life might depend on it. And I'm not being dramatic. The list contains 7 rules, each one stranger than the last. As I read them, a chill ran down my spine despite the oppressive desert heat that seemed to seep through the concrete walls. But here's what will make your blood run cold. By the end of my first week, I understood why every single rule existed, and why the previous employee had disappeared without giving notice. The equipment room contained the usual suspects: industrial vacuum cleaners, pressure washers, and shelves lined with bottles of soap, wax, and cleaning chemicals. But there were other things too, things that didn't belong in any normal car wash. Mirrors covered in black cloth stood in the corners like shrouded monuments. A collection of red plastic buckets sat in a neat row, each one identical except for the strange symbols carved into their sides. And in the far corner, almost hidden behind a stack of towels, was an old photograph of the car wash from its grand opening in 1987, showing a crowd of smiling people gathered around a ribbon-cutting ceremony. What struck me as odd was that in the photograph, every single person's reflection in the wash bay mirrors showed them facing the wrong direction. Jim left me alone after the tour, mumbling something about needing to be home before the witching hour. I wanted to ask him what he meant, but something in his expression warned me not to push. As his truck disappeared into the darkness, the true isolation of the place hit me. The nearest building was a gas station 3 miles down the highway, and beyond that, nothing but endless desert stretching to the horizon. The first few hours passed uneventfully. A handful of late-night travelers stopped to wash road dust from their vehicles, paying with crumpled bills and barely acknowledging my existence. I focused on learning the routine, activate the base systems, provide change, keep the soap dispensers filled, and maintain the equipment. Simple enough. But as midnight approached, the atmosphere began to change. The temperature dropped noticeably, which shouldn't have been possible in the Arizona desert in July. The fluorescent lights seemed to dim, and the constant buzz of the electrical systems grew louder, more insistent. Most unsettling of all, the mirrors in each wash bay began to fog up despite the dry air, creating cloudy surfaces that seemed to move and shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. That's when I heard for the first time a low, melodic whistling echoing from somewhere deep within the wash bays. The tune was hauntingly beautiful, like a lullaby that had been twisted into something sinister. Without thinking, I found myself moving toward the sound, my footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. I was halfway to the first bay when I remembered the number one rule on the list: no whistling after midnight. The realization hit me like a physical blow, and I stumbled backward, suddenly aware that the whistling had stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself, thick and oppressive, as if the entire building was holding its breath. My hands shook as I retreated to the office, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had noticed my approach, something that had been waiting for someone to respond to its call. In the reflection of the office window, I could swear I saw movement in the wash bays behind me, shadows that moved independently of their sources. The rest of the night crawled by with agonizing slowness. Every sound made me jump. Every flicker of the lights sent my heart racing. When dawn finally broke over the desert horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I felt like I'd survived something that I couldn't quite name. But as I gathered my things to leave, I found a note tucked under my time card. Written in faded ink on the same yellowed paper as the rules list, it contained just 4 words: "Welcome to the team." The handwriting looked old, much older than it should have been possible for a note left during my shift. And at the bottom, barely visible, was a date: July 23rd, 1987. The same date as the grand opening photograph. Sleep didn't come easily after my first night at the Vivacity car, Washington. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that haunting whistle echoing through my dreams, and I kept seeing shadows moving in mirrors that reflected things that weren't there. By the time evening arrived, I convinced myself that exhaustion and an overactive imagination had gotten the better of me. But as I drove back to the car wash under a canopy of desert stars, that familiar chill returned to my spine. Jim was waiting for me in the parking lot, leaning against his battered pickup truck with the resigned expression of a man about to deliver bad news. In his weathered hands, he held a manila folder that looked like it had been through several decades of rough handling. "You came back," he said, and I couldn't tell if he sounded surprised or disappointed. Was there any doubt? He studied my face in the flickering neon light, then shook his head slowly. "There's always doubt, kid, especially after the first night." He handed me the folder. Time he learned about the rules, really learned about them. Inside the folder were dozens of incident reports, employee testimonies, and what looked like newspaper clippings dating back to the car wash's opening. The papers were arranged chronologically, and as I flipped through them, a pattern emerged that made my stomach clench with dread. Rule number 1, Jim said, his voice taking on the tone of a teacher explaining a particularly dangerous chemical reaction: "No whistling after midnight." Seems simple enough, right? Just don't whistle when it's late. But it's not about what you do, kid. It's about what whistles back. He pointed to an incident report dated 3 months after the car wash's grand opening. Employee named Marcus Rodriguez. Good worker. Been there since day one. Around 12:30 a.m. on a Tuesday night, he started whistling while cleaning the soap dispensers. Security camera caught it all. About 30 seconds after he started, something began whistling back from wash bay number 2. Same tune, Same rhythm, but the sound was coming from inside the drainage system. I scanned the report, my blood growing colder with each line. Marcus had followed the whistling into the bay, and the security footage showed him bending down toward the drain, his head tilted as if listening to something. Then the video became corrupted, filled with static and distorted images. When it cleared, Marcus was gone. The only trace of him was his uniform shirt, found 3 days later in the desert, 20 miles from the car wash. He was never found. Jim continued. But sometimes, on quiet nights, employees report hearing two voices whistling together from the drainage system. Marcus, and whatever called to him. The second rule seemed equally innocuous at first glance. Never touch the soap dispenser in wash bay number 2. But the incident reports told a different story entirely. The dispenser looks normal, Jim explained, leading me to the middle wash bay. Chrome finish, standard industrial model. Installed in 1987 along with everything else. But it's not the dispenser itself that's the problem. It's what's inside it. We stood before the unit in question, and I had to admit it looked ordinary enough. But as I stared at it, something seemed off about its surface. The chrome appeared to ripple slightly, like liquid mercury, and I could swear I saw shapes moving beneath the reflective finish. Employee named Sarah Chun, 1994. Jim said, consulting another report. New hire, 3rd week on the job. Noticed the soap level was low in bay 2. Went to refill it. The moment her hand made contact with the dispenser, she started screaming. Said it felt like ice, then like fire, then like something was trying to pull her hand inside the metal. According to the report, Sarah had been found unconscious an hour later, her right hand pressed against the dispenser as if welded to it. When paramedics finally managed to separate her from the unit, her palm bore a perfect imprint of symbols that no one could identify. The symbols had remained visible on her skin for 3 days before fading. But Sarah had no memory of the incident beyond touching the dispenser. She quit the next day. Jim said, moved back east, last I heard. But before she left, she told me something interesting. She said the dispenser whispered to her, told her things about herself that no one else knew, secrets from her childhood, promises about her future, and it offered her a choice. What kind of choice? Jim's expression grew grim. She wouldn't say, but she kept looking at her hand, at where those symbols had been, like she was afraid they might come back. The third rule was perhaps the strangest of all. Always use the red bucket for cleaning mirrors. This directive came with a specific protocol outlined in meticulous detail. The red bucket was to be filled only with water from the designated tap in the storage room, never from the wash bay spigots. A specific cleaning solution was to be added, measured precisely, and the mixture was to be stirred counterclockwise exactly 7 times. This rule exists because of what happened to Tommy Nguyen in 1999, Jim said, leading me to the storage room where the red buckets sat in their neat row. Tommy thought he was being efficient. Instead of using the red bucket, he grabbed a regular gray one from the supply closet, filled it from the Bay 2 spigot, used standard glass cleaner. The incident report for Tommy's case was longer than the others, filled with technical language that barely concealed the horror of what had happened. According to the security footage, Tommy had been cleaning the mirrors in Bay 3 when the reflection began acting independently. At first, it simply lagged behind his movements by a few seconds. Then it started moving differently, mimicking actions Tommy wasn't performing. The footage shows Tommy stopping his work and staring at the mirror. Jim continued. He's not moving, but his reflection keeps cleaning, keeps scrubbing the glass. Then the reflection turns around and looks directly at the camera. Security guard who was monitoring said the reflection smiled, but Tommy's face remained expressionless. Within minutes, other employees began reporting strange occurrences throughout the facility. Mirrors in the other bays started showing images of the car wash as it existed in different time periods. Some showed the grand opening ceremony from 1987. Others displayed the facility under construction, and a few showed what appeared to be the land before the car wash existed at all, revealing a small cemetery that had been paved over during construction. Tommy's reflection eventually walked away from the mirror. Jim said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, just turned around and walked right out of the frame, leaving Tommy standing there like an empty shell. He stood motionless for 47 minutes before he suddenly collapsed. When the paramedics arrived, he was alive but completely catatonic. He's been in a care facility ever since, 25 years now. Never spoken a word. But here's the part that still gives me nightmares. The security cameras at the facility where Tommy is housed have occasionally captured his reflection, moving independently in mirrors and windows, still performing cleaning motions, still trapped in an endless loop of the work he was doing when his reflection was stolen. As Jim finished explaining the rules, I found myself staring at the red buckets with new understanding. Each one bore those same strange symbols I'd noticed before, carved deep into the plastic. The symbols seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at them, like living things trying to communicate. The buckets came with the original equipment, Jim said, noticing my fascination. No manufacturer markings, no serial numbers. The installation crew who set up the wash claimed they'd never seen them before, said they weren't part of the original order. But they were here when we opened, and every time we tried to replace them with standard equipment, the paranormal activity increases tenfold. He pulled out a final report, this one more recent. Last guy who worked your shift, Derek Martinez. Good kid. Reminded me of you actually. Smart, skeptical. Thought he could figure out the logical explanation for everything. Started taking photographs, making notes, treating the whole thing like some kind of investigation. The report detailed Derek's increasingly erratic behavior over his final weeks at the car wash. He'd been found talking to empty wash bays, claiming he was having conversations with previous employees. His photographs, when developed, showed images that hadn't been visible when he took them. Shadowy figures standing in the bays, faces in the mirrors that belonged to no one present, and in one particularly disturbing image, his own reflection standing behind him with its hands around his throat. Derek's last night, he decided to break all the rules at once, Jim said he was going to prove it was all psychological manipulation and mass hysteria. Security footage shows him whistling while touching the soap dispenser with his bare hands, cleaning mirrors with a standard bucket fill from the base spigot. Want to know what happened next? I wasn't sure I did, but I nodded anyway. Nothing. For about 10 minutes, absolutely nothing. Derek stood in Bay 2, laughing, taking pictures, making jokes about superstitious coworkers. Then the cameras went dark all at once. When they came back online 6 hours later, Derek was gone. No sign of struggle, no indication of where he went. Just gone. Jim closed the folder and handed it back to me. His car was still in the parking lot, keys in the ignition, wallet and phone on the passenger seat. Like he just evaporated. That was 3 weeks ago. As if summoned by our conversation, a low whistling began echoing from the depths of wash bay number 2. The same haunting melody I'd heard the night before, but this time it seemed more insistent, more beckoning. Jim's face went pale, and he quickly ushered me toward the office. Rule number 1, he said firmly. No matter how beautiful it sounds, no matter how much it makes you want to respond, you do not whistle back. You do not approach the sound, and you definitely do not try to find where it's coming from. But as we reached the office, I realized something that made my blood freeze. The whistling wasn't coming from the drainage system this time. It was coming from above us, from the ventilation system, as if something was moving through the air ducts, following our conversation with keen interest. And just before Jim's truck disappeared into the desert night, leaving me alone with the rules and the shadows, I could have sworn I heard a second voice join the whistling. A voice that sounded disturbingly familiar, like an echo of my own. My second week at the Vivacity car wash began with a false sense of confidence. I'd memorized the rules, studied the incident reports, and convinced myself that knowledge would be my shield against whatever haunted this place. How naive I was to think that understanding the danger would make me immune to it. The night started normally enough. A few customers trickled in during the early hours, their headlights cutting through the darkness like knives through black fabric. I performed my duties mechanically, activate the wash systems, provide change, restock supplies, and most importantly, follow the rules. No whistling after midnight. Never touch the soap dispenser in Bay 2. Always use the red bucket for cleaning mirrors. But around 2:30 a.m., during the dead quiet hours when even the highway traffic dwindled to nothing, something changed. The air itself seemed to thicken, becoming viscous and hard to breathe. The fluorescent lights began to flicker in sequence, creating a rhythm that reminded me uncomfortably of a heartbeat. And the mirrors, all of them, started to fog despite the bone-dry desert air. I was restocking towels in the supply room when I first noticed the cold spot. It appeared suddenly in the center of Wash Bay 3, a circular area about 6 feet in diameter where the temperature had dropped at least 20 degrees. My breath began to mist as I approached, and I could see frost forming on the concrete floor in perfect geometric patterns that looked almost like writing in some alien language. The logical part of my mind scrambled for explanations. Broken air conditioning, thermal venting, underground water pipes. But logic crumbled when I realized the cold spot was moving, drifting slowly across the bay floor like a living thing. As it passed under the overhead lights, the bulbs dimmed and flickered, as if whatever was causing the phenomenon was feeding on the electrical energy. I grabbed one of the red buckets and began preparing the mirror cleaning solution, thinking that routine work might help me focus on something other than the impossible thing happening in front of me. 7 counterclockwise stirs, just like the rules specified. But as I worked, I became aware of another presence in the bay with me. At first, it was just a feeling, that prickly sensation you get when someone is watching you from behind. But when I turned around, I saw something that made my hand shake so violently, I nearly dropped the bucket. In the large mirror mounted on the far wall, there was a reflection that didn't belong to me. The figure was tall and thin, wearing what looked like a car wash uniform from decades past. The fabric was faded and stained with substances I didn't want to identify, and where the face should have been, there was only a smooth, featureless expanse of skin. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just blank flesh that somehow managed to convey an expression of profound sadness. I spun around, but the wash bay behind me was empty. When I looked back at the mirror, the figure was still there, but now it was moving. It raised one hand and pressed it against the glass from the inside, leaving a print that glowed with a sickly phosphorescent light. Then it began to write, its finger trailing luminous letters across the mirror's surface. Derek was here, appeared first, the letters dripping like liquid fire. Below that, more names began to appear. Marcus, Sarah, Tommy, and dozens of others I didn't recognize. A roll call of the disappeared, the damaged, the lost. My rational mind screamed at me to run, to flee the building and never look back. But something else, some deeper instinct, kept me frozen in place. Because as terrifying as the reflection was, I sensed it wasn't trying to harm me. It was trying to warn me. The figure in the mirror raised both hands now, pressing them flat against the glass. The luminous handprints began to multiply, dozens of them appearing across the mirror's surface, as if an entire crowd of invisible beings was trying to break through from the other side. The temperature in the bay dropped even further, and ice began forming on the mirror's surface, spreading outward from each glowing handprint. That's when I heard the voice. It came from everywhere and nowhere, a whisper that seemed to originate inside my own skull. The words were barely audible, like wind through dead leaves, but I understood them with crystal clarity. He's coming back. Every night at 3 a.m., he tries to return. The rules exist to keep him out, but the rules are breaking. Cracks in the foundation, holes in the protection. Soon, very soon, the barrier will fail completely. Ooh, I managed to whisper back, surprised that I could find my voice at all. The Whistler, the one who calls from the dark places. He was the first to disappear back in '87, but he didn't leave. He just went deeper, into the spaces between spaces, the mirrors behind mirrors. He's been gathering others ever since, building an army of the lost. The reflection gestured toward the office, and I realized it wanted me to check something. On unsteady legs, I made my way to the employee files, my heart hammering against my ribs. The figure followed me in every reflective surface I passed, moving from mirror to window to the chrome surface of the soap dispensers. In the filing cabinet, buried beneath years of paperwork, I found what the reflection had wanted me to see. A personnel file for the car wash's very first employee, hired on opening day in 1987. The photograph paperclipped to the inside cover showed a young man with kind eyes and a genuine smile, wearing the same style uniform I'd seen on the reflection. His name was Michael Chun, Sarah's older brother. The same Sarah who'd touched the soap dispenser in 1994 and received those mysterious symbols on her palm. According to his file, Michael had been an exemplary employee for exactly 2 weeks before vanishing without a trace during a routine night shift. But here's what made my blood freeze. The incident report attached to his file described him as an avid musician who often whistled while he worked. The report noted that his disappearance occurred shortly after midnight on a Tuesday, and that the only clue was a recording from the security system of someone whistling a beautiful, haunting melody that echoed through the wash bays long after Michael was gone. When I looked up from the file, the reflection was standing directly behind me in the office window. This time, it had a face. Michael's face, but twisted by decades of suffering into something barely human. His mouth was moving, forming words I couldn't hear but somehow understood. The rules are all that stand between your world and his. Every person who disappears makes him stronger. Every rule that gets broken creates another crack. And now, after all these years, he's found a way to start returning. One piece at a time, one night at a time. Derek wasn't the first to break all the rules at once, and he won't be the last. The reflection pointed toward Wash Bay 2, where the soap dispenser sat gleaming in the fluorescent light. He's in there now, in the spaces between the molecules, in the quantum foam beneath reality. Sarah felt him when she touched the metal. Tommy saw him when he used the wrong bucket. And Derek let him out. As if responding to our conversation, the soap dispenser began to glow with the same phosphorescent light I'd seen on the mirror. The chrome surface rippled like liquid, and I could see shapes moving beneath it, pressing against it from the inside like faces trapped under ice. What does he want? I asked the reflection, though part of me already knew the answer. What he's always wanted. To finish what he started. To turn this place into what it was meant to be. A doorway. A crossing point. A place where the living world touches the realm of the lost. The whistling began then. That same haunting melody I'd heard on my first night. But this time it was coming from multiple sources. The drains, the ventilation system, the mirrors themselves. And underlying it all was another sound, like dozens of voices humming in harmony, creating a symphony of the disappeared. Michael's reflection began to fade, but before it vanished completely, it pressed both hands against the window one final time. Where its palms touched the glass, new words appeared in that same glowing script. 3 a.m. is the crossing hour, when the barrier is thinnest, when he tries to return. The rules have protected this place for 37 years, but they're failing. Too many broken, too many lost. Soon, he'll have enough power to manifest permanently. And when that happens, the Vivacity car wash will become something else entirely. A place where the disappeared can finally come home. The reflection vanished just as the whistling reached a crescendo that made the windows vibrate and the fluorescent lights explode in showers of sparks. In the sudden darkness, illuminated only by the emergency lighting, I could see figures moving in every reflective surface. Dozens of them, all wearing uniforms from different eras, all bearing the marks of their individual tragedies. They were the employees who'd vanished over the years, trapped in the spaces between worlds, serving as unwilling guardians against something far worse. And they were trying to tell me that their long vigil was finally coming to an end. As my eyes adjusted to the dim emergency lighting, I realized that the cold spot had moved again. It was now positioned directly over the drain and wash bay too, and something was trying to push up through the metal grating. The steel bars began to bend and warp, and a sound like fingernails on concrete echoed through the facility. I ran for the office and grabbed the phone, but there was no dial tone. The line was dead, filled with the sound of distant whistling and voices speaking in languages I didn't recognize. My cell phone showed no signal, its screen flickering with static that occasionally resolved into images of the car wash from different time periods. 3 a.m. was still 20 minutes away, but something was coming early tonight. Something that had been growing stronger with each broken rule, each disappeared employee, each crack in the supernatural foundation that kept it contained. And as I barricaded myself in the office, listening to the sound of something large and patient digging its way up through the drainage system, I finally understood why the rules existed and why following them might not be enough anymore. The Vivacity car wash had never been just a business. It had been built on purpose in this specific location as a kind of supernatural prison. And after 37 years, the thing locked inside was finally strong enough to break free. The rest of that night passed in a blur of terror and revelation that would forever change my understanding of what lurked beneath the surface of our mundane world. As I huddled in the office, listening to sounds that defied explanation echoing through the wash bays, I realized that Michael's reflection had left me more than just a warning. Hidden beneath the scattered incident reports, I found a manila envelope marked Construction Records, Confidential. Inside were blueprints, geological surveys, and most importantly, a series of photographs that revealed the true history of the land beneath the Vivacity car Washington. The images were black and white, dating back to the 1950s, and they showed something that made my blood run cold. A small cemetery, complete with weathered headstones and a wrought iron fence that had been twisted into impossible shapes by some tremendous force. According to the geological survey, the cemetery had been abandoned sometime in the 1940s after a series of unexplained incidents. Local records described strange phenomena: graves that remained cold even in the desert heat, headstones that cracked and reformed themselves overnight, and reports of visitors becoming lost in the small cemetery for hours despite its modest size. The final incident involved a groundskeeper who claimed to have discovered additional graves that weren't on any official records, graves that seemed to dig themselves deeper each night. But it was the construction photos from 1987 that truly revealed the scope of what had been hidden. Instead of properly relocating the remains, the developers had simply paved over the entire cemetery. The concrete foundation of the car wash was poured directly over the graves, sealing whatever restless spirits lay beneath under tons of industrial-grade cement. The wash bays had been positioned deliberately over the largest concentration of unmarked graves, creating what one handwritten note in the margin described as containment points. The photographs showed something else too. During construction, workers had discovered a much older grave at the center of the cemetery, marked only by stone bearing symbols identical to those carved into the red buckets. According to the notes, this grave predated the others by at least a century and had been dug far deeper than any normal burial. When they tried to excavate it for relocation, they found it empty except for a collection of personal items that seemed to belong to people who had lived decades apart. Among these items was a pocket watch stopped at 3 a.m., a wedding ring engraved with a date from 1923, and a car wash employee uniform that wouldn't be manufactured until 1987. The construction foreman who found these items had made a note that still chilled me to the bone. It's like this grave was waiting for people who hadn't died yet. The more I read, the clearer the pattern became. The cemetery hadn't been abandoned due to random supernatural activity. It had been the site of a deliberate containment, a place where something ancient and hungry had been imprisoned by people who understood the danger it represented. The twisted fence, the cold graves, the reports of visitors becoming lost. These weren't random hauntings. They were symptoms of something trying to break free. And in 1987, when the developers poured concrete over the containment site, they hadn't destroyed the prison. They had simply built a new one, using the car wash as a cover for a more sophisticated supernatural security system. The rules weren't arbitrary workplace policies. They were ritual protections, designed to maintain the barriers that kept the imprisoned entity from fully manifesting in our world. A loose sheet of paper fell from the construction records, covered in handwriting that I recognized from the original rules list. It was a letter from the car wash's first manager, a man named Robert Cross, addressed to someone called the Foundation. The facility is operational and the initial containment protocols are in place. The subject remains dormant, but shows signs of increased activity following the completion of construction. Recommend implementing the 7-point behavioral restriction system as discussed. Staff training should focus on absolute compliance rather than understanding. The less they know about the true purpose of their work, the better. However, I must express my concerns about the long-term viability of this approach. The subject's influence appears to be growing stronger with each passing year, and I fear that standard containment measures may prove insufficient. We've already lost 2 employees during the setup phase, and their disappearances have only seemed to feed the entity's power. If the behavioral restrictions fail, we may need to consider more drastic measures. The nuclear option remains available, but the collateral damage would be significant. For now, we proceed with the agreed-upon plan and hope that routine maintenance of the barriers will be sufficient. May God forgive us for what we've built here. The letter was dated July 15th, 1987, just 8 days before the car wash's grand opening. At the bottom, in different handwriting, someone had added, R. Cross reported missing July 23rd, 87. Assumed to be subject's first acquisition. Recommend immediate implementation of emergency protocols. Robert Cross had become the first victim of the thing he'd helped imprison. And according to the incident reports I'd already read, every subsequent disappearance had made the entity stronger, more capable of influencing the physical world. Each broken rule created cracks in the containment system. Each missing employee became part of its growing army of the lost. But the most disturbing revelation was yet to come. In a folder marked Personnel Psychological Evaluations, I found reports on every employee who had worked the night shift over the past 37 years. The pattern was unmistakable. Each worker had been carefully selected based on specific psychological profiles that made them particularly susceptible to the entity's influence. People with artistic temperaments who might be drawn to the beauty of its whistle. Individuals with curious natures who would be tempted to investigate supernatural phenomena. Workers with personal tragedies who might be vulnerable to promises of reunion with lost loved ones. The car wash wasn't just a prison. It was a feeding ground, designed to provide the imprisoned entity with a steady supply of psychic energy drawn from human suffering and fear. And I fit the profile perfectly. Recent college graduate, student of folklore and mythology, recently lost both parents in a car accident. I hadn't gotten this job by chance. I'd been selected, recruited, groomed to become the entity's next meal. As this realization sank in, the sound from the wash bays grew louder and more urgent. The whistling had evolved into something that resembled singing a wordless melody that seemed to bypass my ears and resonate directly in my bones. The temperature in the office began to drop, and frost started forming on the windows in those same geometric patterns I'd seen on the bay floor. The clock on the wall read 2:47 a.m., 13 minutes until the crossing hour, when the barrier between worlds would be at its thinnest. 13 minutes until whatever had been imprisoned beneath the car wash for over a century would make its strongest attempt yet to break free. But I had learned something that previous employees hadn't known, the truth about what they were facing. And armed with that knowledge, I realized that the rules weren't just protective measures. They were the key to a more permanent solution. According to the construction records, the original containment system had been designed with multiple fail-safes. If the behavioral restrictions failed, there were backup protocols that could be activated to reinforce the barriers. But these protocols required deliberate action from someone who understood the true nature of the threat. The emergency procedures were outlined in a document marked Protocol 7, Last Resort. It detailed a ritual that would temporarily strengthen the containment field, but at a terrible cost. The ritual required a willing participant to serve as a human anchor, someone who would bind their life force to the prison to reinforce its weakening walls. Previous employees had disappeared because they'd stumbled into the entity's influence without understanding what was happening. But someone who knew the truth, who chose to act with full knowledge of the consequences, could turn the tables. The ritual was complex, involving specific actions that had to be performed in precise sequence across all 3 wash bays. It would require breaking certain rules deliberately while following others with absolute precision, creating a controlled collapse of the containment system that would reset the barriers at maximum strength. But the person performing the ritual would become permanently connected to the prison, serving as its living guardian until death released them from the obligation. As I studied the procedures, the whistling outside grew, so loud that the windows began to vibrate in their frames. Something was moving through the wash bays now, something large enough to cast shadows that blocked out entire sections of fluorescent lighting. The metal drainage grates were glowing cherry red, as if exposed to intense heat from below, and the concrete floor had begun to crack in radiating patterns that looked disturbingly organic. 2:52 a.m., 8 minutes until the crossing hour. I made my decision. Grabbing the red bucket and the specialized cleaning solution, I prepared for what might be my final task as a living human being. If I was right about the ritual, I could reset the containment system and buy the world another 37 years of protection. If I was wrong, I would simply become the latest in a long line of disappeared employees, and the entity would continue growing stronger until it achieved full manifestation. But as I opened the office door and stepped into the main facility, I realized that something had changed. The air was thick with an oily substance that clung to my skin and made breathing difficult. The mirrors in all 3 bays now showed the same image, the car wash as it had appeared on opening day, but populated by dozens of figures in employee uniforms from different eras. They were all watching me, their faces bearing expressions of desperate hope. Among them, I could see Robert Cross, the first manager, still wearing his 1987 business suit. Sarah Chin stood beside her brother Michael, the symbols on her palm glowing like brands. Tommy Nguyen was there too, moving with the same mechanical cleaning motions he'd been trapped in for 25 years. And at the front of the group, Derek Martinez held up a sign written in that same phosphorescent script. You can still choose. The entity itself remained invisible, but its presence was overwhelming. I could feel its attention like a physical weight, and when I looked at the drainage grates, I could see something vast and patient pressing up from below. It had been feeding on the fear and confusion of its victims for decades, growing stronger with each soul it claimed. But it had never faced someone who understood exactly what it was and what it wanted. Following the first step of Protocol 7, I filled the red bucket with the prescribed solution and began walking toward wash bay number 1. As I moved, the temperature continued to drop and my breath came out in visible puffs that seemed to hang in the air longer than they should have. The fluorescent lights flickered in sequence, creating a strobe effect that made the shadows dance like living things. The ritual required me to clean each mirror in a specific pattern while reciting words in a language that predated human civilization. The syllables felt wrong in my mouth, like they were reshaping my vocal cords to accommodate sounds that weren't meant for human throats. But with each word, the images in the mirrors became clearer, showing me glimpses of the entity's true form, something that existed in too many dimensions for human perception to process. A writhing mass of hunger and rage that had been old when the first humans learned to make fire. In bay number 2, I had to deliberately touch the soap dispenser while maintaining perfect mental focus on the containment symbols. The metal burned like dry ice against my palm, and I felt the entity's consciousness trying to force its way into my mind. It showed me visions of power, of knowledge, of reunion with my dead parents. It promised me understanding of the universe's deepest secrets, immortality, the ability to reshape reality according to my desires. But I had read the incident reports. I had seen what happened to people who accepted its bargains. Sarah's symbols had been a mark of ownership, not gift. Tommy's catatonia was the result of having his soul partially devoured. Derek's disappearance had been the price of his curiosity. No, I said aloud, and the single word echoed through the facility like a gunshot. The visions collapsed, replaced by a wave of rage so intense that every piece of glass in the building cracked simultaneously. 2:58 a.m., 2 minutes until the crossing hour. In bay number 3, the final step of the ritual required me to break the cardinal rule. I had to whistle back, but not just any whistle. I had to recreate the exact melody the entity used to call its victims, turning its own hunting song into a binding spell. As the first notes left my lips, the imprisoned thing below let out a sound that was part roar, part scream, part something that had no name in any human language. The concrete floor split open in a perfect circle, revealing the ancient grave that had been hidden beneath decades of industrial construction. But instead of bones or artifacts, the pit contained only darkness so absolute that it seemed to devour light itself. And from that darkness, something began to emerge. I saw its true form for perhaps 3 seconds before my mind refused to process anymore. It was vast and twisted, composed of angles that violated geometry and colors that shouldn't exist. Eyes opened and closed along its surface like blinking stars, and each eye showed a different scene of torment from the lives it had consumed. Tentacles or appendages or something worse reached toward me, seeking to drag me down into the space between spaces where it made its home. But the ritual was working. As I continued whistling, the entity's form began to waver and distort. The binding words I'd spoken earlier were taking effect, creating chains of pure will that wrapped around the creature's essence. The disappeared employees in the mirrors stepped forward, no longer prisoners, but partners in the containment effort. Their combined spiritual energy merged with mine, creating a net of human determination that the entity couldn't break. The clock struck 3 a.m. just as I reached the final note of the melody. The crossing hour had arrived, the moment when the barrier should have been at its weakest. Instead, it slammed shut with the force of a closing vault door. The entity's scream of rage and frustration shattered every remaining piece of glass in the building. But it was already fading, being pulled back into the depths from which it had tried to emerge. The pit in the floor sealed itself, leaving only smooth concrete behind. The mirrors cleared, showing only my own reflection, exhausted but triumphant. The temperature began to return to normal, and the oppressive presence that had filled the air dissipated like smoke in a strong wind. But I could feel it inside me now, the connection that made me the prison's new guardian. I was bound to this place just as surely as the entity was trapped beneath it. I would grow old here, watching over the containment system, making sure the rules were followed, protecting the world from something that should never have existed. As dawn broke over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, I understood that my life as I had known it was over. But the lives of everyone else, everyone who would never know how close they had come to facing an ancient hunger that could devour souls, would continue safely. The Vivacity car wash would remain open, serving its dual purpose as both a business and a prison. New employees would come and go, most of them never suspecting the truth. And I would be here, following the rules, maintaining the barriers, serving as the bridge between human determination and supernatural containment. It wasn't the future I had planned for myself, but it was the future the world needed me to choose. 3 months have passed since that night, when I became something more and less than human. 3 months of maintaining the careful balance between the mundane world above and the hungry darkness below. 3 months of understanding, with crystalline clarity, why the rules exist and what happens when they're broken. The Vivacity car wash operates normally during daylight hours. Customers come and go, washing road dust and desert grime from their vehicles, never suspecting that they're standing above one of the most dangerous supernatural containment sites in North America. The day shift employees are good people, hardworking and friendly, and I've made sure they never need to know the truth about what lurks beneath their feet. But I am no longer entirely the person who first walked through these doors seeking nothing more than a paycheck. The ritual that saved the world from an ancient evil also changed me in ways I'm still discovering. I can see things now that others cannot. The thin places where reality grows weak, the shadows that move independently of their sources, the faces and mirrors that belong to people who disappeared decades ago. Most significantly, I can communicate with the previous guardians who came before me. Robert Cross still walks these halls, invisible to everyone else, but clear as day to my enhanced perception. He was the first to bind himself to the containment system back in 1987, when the entity's initial attempt at freedom nearly succeeded. His sacrifice bought 37 years of relative peace, but the strain of maintaining the barriers alone had begun to drive him toward madness. "You did the right thing," he told me on my first morning as the new guardian. His form was translucent, like smoke given human shape, but his voice carried the weight of decades of vigilance. The burden is easier to bear when it's shared, because that's what I learned in those final moments of the ritual. I wasn't replacing Robert Cross as the prison's guardian. I was joining him. The containment system was designed to accommodate multiple anchors, human souls bound to its structure, to provide the spiritual energy needed to maintain the barriers. Every previous disappearance at the car wash had actually been someone making the same choice I had made, choosing to sacrifice their normal lives to protect the world from something that should never have existed. We are all still here. The missing employees of the Vivacity car Washington Sarah Chun helps me maintain the specialized cleaning solutions, her knowledge of chemistry proving invaluable in keeping the ritual components properly balanced. Tommy Nguyen, no longer trapped in catatonic repetition, assists with equipment maintenance, ensuring that every mechanical system operates exactly as the containment protocols require. Michael Chin's musical abilities help him monitor the entity's emotional state through the variations in its whistling, providing early warning when its frustration begins building toward another escape attempt. Even Derek Martinez, the most recent addition to our supernatural staff, has found his place in the new order. His investigative skills and photographic evidence have helped us document changes in the containment system, allowing us to refine our protective measures and close loopholes before they become dangerous. We exist in a state between life and death, between the human world and the realm of spirits. During daylight hours, we're invisible to normal perception, watching over the facility like benevolent ghosts. But when night falls and I take my position at the front desk, we become a team of supernatural security guards, maintaining the oldest and most important night shift in human history. The rules remain in effect, of course. They're more crucial now than ever, because while our ritual reset the containment system to maximum strength, it also made us intimately aware of how easily that strength can be compromised. Every broken rule creates stress fractures in the barriers. Every employee who ignores the protocols weakens the locks that keep ancient hunger imprisoned. But we've learned something that the original designers of this place never understood. The entity below isn't just a mindless force of destruction. It's intelligent, calculating, and endlessly patient. It has spent over a century studying human behavior, learning our weaknesses, finding ways to exploit our natural curiosity and skepticism. The disappearances weren't random tragedies. They were recruitment attempts, efforts to build an army of human servants who could work to weaken the containment system from within. What it never expected was that its victims would choose to become willing guardians instead of unwilling servants. By binding ourselves to the prison, we turned its greatest weapon, our human capacity for sacrifice and determination, against it. Jim still manages the day shift, though he's begun showing signs of the supernatural sensitivity that comes from prolonged exposure to the car wash's unique environment. Sometimes I catch him talking to empty air, responding to comments from guardians he can't quite see, but somehow hears. I think he's beginning to understand that the night shift employee who never seems to age or tire might not be entirely human anymore. He's a good man, and when the time comes for him to make his own choice about whether to join us permanently, I believe he'll make the right decision. Until then, he continues his role as the bridge between our hidden world and the normal operations of the business, ensuring that new employees receive proper training in the rules without ever learning why those rules exist. The entity still tests the boundaries of its prison, of course. Every few weeks, it attempts some new variation on its escape strategies, probing for weaknesses in our defenses. The whistling continues, though it's grown more complex over the months, incorporating harmonies and counter-melodies that suggest it's learning from our responses. The soap dispenser in Bay, too, occasionally shows images of the outside world, tantalizing glimpses of the destruction it would wreak if freed. And sometimes, on the quietest nights, we can hear it speaking in languages that predate human civilization, calling out to other entities that might be listening from their own prisons around the world. But we're ready for whatever it might try. Our team of guardian spirits has had decades to study its behavior, and we've developed countermeasures for every trick in its ancient playbook. More importantly, we've created a system that can potentially last forever, with each generation of guardians training the next in the knowledge and skills needed to maintain a containment. The Vivacity car wash will continue to operate as long as human beings need to wash their cars, and probably long after. It's become something unique in the world, a supernatural containment facility disguised as a mundane business, staffed by people who chose to sacrifice their normal lives to protect everyone else from nightmares they'll never have to face. And sometimes, late at night when the highway is empty and the desert wind carries sounds from impossible distances, I feel a deep satisfaction in the knowledge that my choice mattered. Every family that drives past without incident, every traveler who stops to clean their windshield and continues safely on their journey, every child who grows up in a world where ancient hungers remain safely contained, they all exist because a few people were willing to give up their ordinary lives to maintain an extraordinary secret. The rules are still bizarre, but now I understand that they're bizarre for the best possible reason. They work. They've worked for 37 years. They're working now, and with proper maintenance and vigilance, they'll continue working for as long as humanity needs protection from the things that lurk in the spaces between spaces. So if you ever find yourself driving through the Arizona desert late at night, and you see the flickering neon sign of the Vivacity car wash, feel free to stop. We'll wash your car, provide excellent customer service, and send you safely on your way. Just remember to follow the rules posted in each bay, treat the equipment with respect, and trust that some mysteries are better left unsolved. Because we're watching, we guardian spirits of the night shift. We're here to make sure that some doors stay closed, some hungers remain unfed, and some ancient evils never see the light of day again. The Vivacity Car Wash is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But between midnight and dawn, it serves a purpose far more important than automotive hygiene. It stands guard against the darkness, staffed by people who chose to become something more than human in order to keep the rest of humanity safe. And that's a story that will continue as long as there are people willing to work the night shift, follow the rules, and pay the price for everyone else's peace of mind. Welcome to the Vivacity Car Washington. Please observe all posted regulations and have a safe journey into the night.